the end of the first unit of social studies. Whether you're doing 2201 or 2202, this little recap is relevant to both. Obviously, if you're doing 2201, you've been looking at the textbook, there's a lot more detail in there. But essentially, we've taken the time through videos and through your textbook to look at how we got from those earliest hominids, which were more ape-like than human-like in many ways, to Homo sapiens sapiens, who were the forerunners of modern humans. And what I want to do really quickly is just look back at our 4 key theme points. Because remember I said, throughout this course, for every time period in history we look at, we're going to be looking at what did we learn about these 4 themes in that time period. So the key thing with the early humans, the hominids, and then the people who became the ancestors of modern humans is that most of this is pretty basic, right? They did not have fully developed economic systems, political systems, or really complex ways of dealing with conflict. What they did have, though, was a lot of innovation. Not in a short time. Over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, innovations began, and it was these innovations, first unintentional things that just happened as they adapted to the environment, and later intentional as people planned and made changes to the environment around them that enabled them to become modern humans. So when we talk about innovation in this period, we're talking about things like developing stone tools. The very earliest hominids did this, sharpening bits of stone to use to, break open a shell or kill an animal, and that's the very first step. The ability to use fire, to make fire, not just, observing random fires started by lightning, but to be able to say, hey, I can actually start one of these fires and we can cook our food. Of course, they couldn't say that, they could think it on some level, until they had a spoken language, the ability to communicate in spoken language. Huge leap forward. And then, of course, the biggest one that really led to everything we're going to look at in the next unit with the first settled, what we call civilizations, was the development of agriculture, the idea that instead of just hunting and gathering, although to some extent some humans have always done a certain amount of hunting and gathering, but that you could supplement that by planting seeds in the ground, staying in that area, waiting for the crop to come up and harvest, and then eating that food that you had grown, keeping your animals together in herds rather than just going out and hunting random animals. All of that, the development of agriculture, then led to everything that we ultimately know as human culture. So all these steps along the way in innovation that happened over a period of millions of years were what moved these very early hominids, who we would look at and say, oh, that's really more of an animal, to the Homo sapiens sapiens that we would look at and say, that's our ancestor, that's one of the early humans. Remember that when we talk about economics, we're talking about how people get their wants and needs met. And in this time period, we're looking at a very basic system of economics. Most people are focused just on needs. How are we going to eat? How are we going to find shelter? What are we going to clothe our bodies with to protect us from the elements once they get to the point of making clothes? But there's not a whole lot of space in the lives of these early humans to focus on wants, to focus on things just for luxuries, because there's so much of their time is taken up just meeting their needs. There may have been some basic trade within groups or among groups for items, but for the most part, everybody is just working to survive. So there's not a lot of trade, and the economy is very basic. It's focused on what we call subsistence. Same thing is true with politics. So with the earliest hominids, there's no complex political system. They live in very small groups, bands, that are governed by consensus. Consensus simply means everybody has to agree. If there's a problem, if somebody is causing a problem, if there's not enough resources, we work together to try to solve it. And you don't develop any kind of complex political systems, not even the concept of one person being a leader and other people having specialized jobs to do. You don't really get that until people begin settling more permanently in towns and cities, practicing agriculture, and living in larger groups, because consensus works really well for a small group, especially if they're bound by blood and kinship ties. They're basically like an extended family. Consensus doesn't work as well when you have a few hundred people living in a settled area, growing crops and raising animals and specializing into different jobs. That's when you start thinking, how are we going to make decisions for this larger group? Consensus doesn't work anymore on that scale. You end up either choosing people as leaders or people just rising to power as leaders. And again, we'll look at that more in the next unit. We don't know much about conflict, although there's certainly some archaeological evidence that there may have been some conflict within groups. And you saw some of this dramatized in the Walking with Cavemen series, but again, this is our best guess. We don't know for sure. It's possible that within these groups there may have been some conflict over, who gets the best piece of food, which male gets to mate with which female. Probably solved by simply fighting each other, maybe fighting to the death. We don't know for sure. What we do know is these small consensus bands couldn't afford a lot of conflict, right? Everybody had to work together. There could have been conflict between groups. In many cases, this would have just been solved because there were so few people and so much land. It would have just been solved by moving away. So we're conflicting with each other over who gets to drink the fresh water from this stream. Another group wants it. We were here first. Well, maybe they'll just go away and find another stream. You do get some sense that there may have been violent clashes in later periods between different groups. This could be why, for example, hominids, early humans such as the Neanderthal, became extinct. They may have just died out, but there also may have been violent clashes between them and other early human groups that led to their becoming extinct. A lot of this we have to guess about, but we know that, again, any organized approach to conflict, like for example, our army is going to go out and go to war with your army, comes at a later time period when people start developing agriculture and settling down into settled communities. In the early period that we've been studying in this unit, conflict would have been happening at a pretty basic and simple level. So that's a quick overview. You should have your questions for the chapter turned into me a little ahead of the date for your test, and I'll put all that in your Teams folder, dates and stuff, so that when I've had a look at those questions and gotten them back to you, you can use those as kind of a review sheet for your unit test. There will be a unit test, and people will be writing it on different days based on what day you come into class and whether you're writing it in class or online, because you will have those options. So we'll talk about that in the Teams group, and we'll figure out when your test is going to be. But it will be a good idea to get your chapter questions into me before your test so I can mark them, get them back to you, and then that corrected set of questions is going to be your review sheet for the test, including all those terms and definitions, because a lot of them will be on your unit test.